Hello and welcome back. Today is all about neurons and synapses. So today we're going to talk about brain cells, how they get information through the rest of your body, and specifically synapses, which has like a lot of moving parts that we will talk about and work on and make sure that you are comfortable being able to like label, annotate, draw, etc. So let's just start with a general overview of the nervous system. So the nervous system itself can be broken down into two pieces. There's the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is literally just your brain and your spinal cord. And that's all you need to know about that. The central nervous system is like your main hub of sending out information. The peripheral nervous system is everything else. Okay, so there's the autonomic nervous system, which is involuntary control, right? Maintains homeostasis in your life. So there's sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and digest, and enteric, which controls the digestive system, right? You don't think about that kind of stuff, right? You don't think about breathing, you don't think about your heart beating, you don't think about actually digesting food, and you don't think about increasing your adrenaline when something spooks you, right? You just automatically do it. So that's the autonomic nervous system. And then the somatic nervous system is when you receive an external stimuli. So, okay, I'm going to touch a hot stove. I'm getting that external stimuli of, holy smokes, my hand is burning. And then I have voluntary control of the muscle. So I get that stimulus. It goes through the peripheral nerves that maybe go from my fingertip up my arm to my spinal cord, and then there's like a relay action, and it comes back down my arm, back to my fingertip, and I remove my fingertip from the hot stove. So I voluntarily controlled my finger and removed it from the hot stove. Now, neurons themselves are the brain cells. They look like this crazy thing, right, with like this tree and then this tail and then like these little like frog toes at the end. So the nervous system is composed of neurons, and they carry rapid electrical impulses. Those impulses just fly through the neuron and continue to either another neuron or to muscle cells. So in this, this is our kind of like our cell body with the nucleus in the middle. These branches that are coming off are called dendrites, and then the tail is called an axon. On the axon, you have these myelin sheaths. These myelin sheaths increase the speed at which impulses will travel because they hop from like this sheath to this one to this one. So it increases the speed. In between the sheaths, you have what are called nodes of Ranvier. Just like, guess who invented that, or guess who first discovered that? Like, obviously this dude named Ranvier named it after himself. And then at the end, you have these terminal branches which are going to actually connect to something. In between neuron to neuron, if these terminal branches were on this side, right, if you had another neuron over here and it was connected to this one, the section where they meet is called a synapse. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later, but you do see that there is a whole nother piece here, and it's got a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts in there, so we're going to talk about that. But the synapse is where neurons will talk to each other. So the reflex arc is what I was sort of talking about earlier with the hot stove example. So you have receptors in your skin, and if something happens, like you touch a hot stove, those receptors are going to send a message down a sensory neuron. Okay, so it's going to send it to the central nervous system on this sensory neuron, and then there's going to be a relay neuron, which will either send it to the brain, and your brain will make like a split-second decision, or if it's like actual pain, like, I don't know, like burning your hand, but like even more intense than that, it won't even send that message. It will just immediately relay, like, move your hand, or like stop doing what you're doing, like that's really painful. And so that's why sometimes when like something really, really hurts, you like move your hand before you even realize that you were in pain, and then like your brain recognizes it like half a second later. It's because your spinal cord was like, I got this, like this is an emergency, I don't have time to go all the way up to the brain to talk about this. So after the relay neuron, whether it goes up to the brain or not, you go back out towards the muscle on a motor neuron, and that motor neuron is going to connect to the actual muscles themselves and cause some sort of reaction. Whether you're moving your hand or doing something else, it will cause the actual reaction to happen. So nerve impulses is a result of a change in concentrations of sodium and potassium ions. Okay, this is the idea of depolarization and repolarization. We'll talk more about this, but this concentration is what actually causes neurons to talk to each other. So this nerve impulse will only get started if an action potential happens. So normally, if you're not doing anything, you're just like resting, your nerves are in their resting potential state. They're not conducting an impulse. The electrical potential is just very calm. If you need to then like move your arm or something, an action potential is going to start. And that is the depolarization and repolarization of the electrical potential across the neuron, right, across the plasma membrane, as that nerve impulse passes along the neuron. So every time this impulse gets sent from neuron to neuron, each neuron is going through its own action potential. So, resting potential is when like you're not doing anything, things are cool, everything's happy. This is maintained by active transport, okay? Some potassium ions diffuse back out, so you want to be more positive outside of the neuron than you are on the inside. You want to be more negative on the inside. This is just maintained with energy, making sure that sodium's diffusing out, potassium is coming in. Okay, so you're just like constantly moving things wherever they need to be to maintain this electrical pulse. And then the action potential causes depolarization. So, right, you have the resting potential, and then the arrival of an action potential causes depolarization. This causes your sodium to diffuse, and then if the current is enough to rise above the threshold, then the voltage-gated sodium channels open and sodium comes into the neuron. This causes the inside to be more positive, right? Depolarization. And then when that happens, the potassium channels open and potassium diffuses out, and then the internal charge is more negative again. That causes repolarization. So this action potential fluctuates where the positive and negative are. And then there's a refractory period. The refractory period is when you have these channels open and things are moving either in or out, but not how you are in resting potential. Sometimes you can overcorrect. And so when you overcorrect, then you have to like go back and let diffusion happen and active transport happen, and it will eventually level back out into the resting potential. So just to show you, like, this is your resting potential. As you get the action potential, right, you open up sodium channels, then you open up a lot more if the threshold is hit, and then you close the sodium channels, but you open the potassium channels, and that's going to kind of bring it back down. Right, it's going to repolarize, and then you see how this dipped just a little bit below your resting potential? This is your refractory period. So we overcorrected, and now we have to level back out into resting potential. So synaptic transmission at the dendritic end of a neuron, that's like where the cell body is and the neuron is, where those like big branches are. each dendrite collects nerve impulses from the end of another neuron. This is how information is passed from one neuron to the next, right? If I want to send an impulse all the way to like wiggle my toes, it's going to send it from my brain, and it's just going to follow neuron after neuron after neuron all the way down my body, and this impulse is going to jump from neuron to neuron until it gets to my toes so that I can wiggle my toes. So this impulse is going to jump, though, across this gap between the dendrite of one neuron and the terminal end of a second neuron. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. You should be able to label this diagram, well, draw it and label it. So to begin with, we have this yellow arrow that is representing the action potential. The orange ovals, I don't know, but they're supposed to be the mitochondria. We have a voltage-gated calcium channel and a calcium pump. Okay, this is just maintaining the amount of calcium that we have in our neurons. We have a vesicle, which are carrying, well, that's the next one, the neurotransmitter. These little triangle shapes are neurotransmitters. This is what is going to eventually be sent out into the synapse gap and into the second neuron. We have the neurotransmitter reuptake pump. This just, when the neurotransmitters are done, they can get like sucked back into here with this reuptake pump. The synaptic cleft or synaptic gap is the space in between the two neurons. We have neurotransmitter receptors, which are what actually connects to the neurotransmitters and starts the action potential on the second neuron. We have a sodium channel, and again, the action potential will continue on. So, just a quick summary of what I was just saying. The nerve impulse reaches the terminal end of the presynaptic neuron, or neuron number 1, right? The action potential comes down. This impulse is heading all the way down into the end, the terminal end of our first neuron. The depolarization causes these calcium channels to open and calcium will come in, okay? So depolarization causes an influx of calcium. Calcium causes the synaptic vesicles to move to the membrane. So these vesicles that are filled with neurotransmitters are going to move to the membrane, right, to the outer edge of the neuron, and once they're on the outer edge of the neuron, they are going to diffuse across that gap. So they have moved because of calcium. They're now opening up into the gap, and these neurotransmitters are going to move out across the gap and bind with the receptors on the second neuron. Once they bind with the receptors on the second neuron, the sodium channels are going to open, which causes sodium to enter, which leads to depolarization, and the action potential is initiated on the second neuron. And once that action potential is initiated, this is going to continue on all the way through the second neuron until it gets to the terminal end of the second neuron, and it will do this whole process to go to a third neuron or to a muscle cell. And the very last thing that happens is enzymes in the gap break down the neurotransmitters, and then those products, whatever they may be, are taken up by the first neuron by active transport and can then be reused in various ways for the neuron. Okay, we are going to practice this more in class and make sure that you guys actually understand how this synaptic transmission works and how neurons talk to each other and talk to muscles. But for now, this is everything for the notes, so great job, and I'll see you in class.